So let's first discuss why Inkscape and essentially what is it? What does it do for us? So first of all, things you need to understand is that Inkscape is a vector graphics editor, which means we're not editing an image, we're editing these vector graphics. They're essentially shapes. The advantage about that is when we zoom in really far in a vector graphics area, we don't get the pixelation that we normally get with editing an image. The easiest thing is to show you an example of that. So let's go into Photoshop. And this is a picture that I captured of someone's golf course. And you'll see if I zoom in on this really far, you can see how it starts to pixelate. So now you can see each one of these squares is a pixel, and it starts to essentially just kind of get blurry, right? And if I zoom out, it looks normal. The problem with zooming in like this is that it's really hard to work with any degree of accuracy on those shapes. Whereas a vector graphics editor is completely different. If I come in here to Inkscape and I go into this basic file, you can see I have two shapes here. And if I zoom in on these shapes, you can see no matter how far I zoom in, these stay very rigid, very tight, okay, no matter how far I zoom in. Now these are just basic shapes, and I can take them and you can see if I drag this one over, it goes on top of this shape. And I can manipulate these shapes. They're not images, they're vector graphics, okay? So that's the first thing you need to understand about Inkscape. Now the advantage of that though is we can use that to make the shapes and areas that define our ground boundaries inside of our game. Okay, we're going to get into what all those boundaries are and how they're different from each other, but it's a great way to do that. That Inkscape file that we're going to eventually create at the end of this can be used for a couple different things. And Inkscape files can be used for a wide variety of things. As far as making a golf course, the one thing we're going to do is we're going to use that overlay image, this Inkscape, and we're going to bring it into Unity, and we're going to lay it on top of our terrain, and then we can dig our terrain. For example, water bodies. If we want to dig out a lake or a stream, we can bring it into Unity, put it over our terrain, and then use tools inside of Unity to dig virtually that terrain, make it deeper in certain areas or shallower in certain areas. That's typically done with water bodies. Bunkers are a very common thing, and also things like tee boxes. We might want to flatten those. So digging isn't always going down. Sometimes it's just flattening things out. Another thing we're going to do with this Inkscape image is we're going to create 3D meshes in Blender. So right now everything's two-dimensional. We're eventually going to make this three-dimensional. So we're going to take this Inkscape file and we're going to upload it into the cloud, and we're going to do some things on it that's going to make it into a three-dimensional file that we can use in Blender. Okay, so that's the second thing we use it for. And the third thing that's completely optional is you can use a vector graphics file as the basis for modeling other objects. For example, a lot of people use it to make T markers. So if you can create a vector graphics file, you can actually bring that into something like Blender, and then you can do things like extruding it, and you can make T markers. That's more of an advanced topic. Something, if you're interested, I would go into the Discord and look at the 3D modeling areas in there. But it's just a good example of what you can do with Inkscape.